everyone!
We're Anna and James.
Back in 2021, we eloped in Iceland.
And as we started going through that process, we realized there really weren't a whole lot of resources for navigating that. So we decided we'd share what we learned with you guys. That includes collecting all the right legal documents and the actual costs of eloping abroad.
So come along and get away with the maze.
So why did we choose Iceland? We decided that our next trip was going to be in Iceland because, well, number one, it's quite beautiful. And number two, in 2021, it was really one of the only places that was open for tourists.
Yeah, and I think it had just barely opened for
just
tourism.
Barely.
So I had chosen our previous destination, which means James got to choose the next one.
And somewhere along the way while we were planning, we just decided, hey, we're in such a beautiful place, why don't we go ahead and get married while we're there?
Yeah. Yay! Since we're not from Iceland, we knew that getting married abroad would take a bit of extra coordinating to make sure it was legit in both Iceland and back home in the US.
So here's what our process looked like.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is paperwork. There was a lot of details to get together to make sure that this marriage was recognized in the United States.
And now it's important to realize that what we're going to share with you really worked for us as residents of South Carolina. But if you live in a different state or a different country, you're going to need to do just a little bit of research to see which requirements will apply to you.
The first thing we did is what any other reasonable person would do. We Googled it. We found the website for the Icelandic District Commissioners.
And that website outlined the paperwork we would need, so we got right to it.
So the first thing we had to do was pick up copies of our birth certificates from the Department of Vital Statistics. That was kind of a pain in and of itself because it's like any other state office where you have to take a number, wait in line, and wait a fair amount of time. So we both had to take time off of work to actually get this done.
So the next thing we had to procure was a thing that really doesn't exist in the United States. It's called a certificate of non-marriage, and it's basically a piece of paper that says neither one of us are married to anyone else, and that legally we're able to get married.
This was a particularly tricky step, since it's not technically a form or procedure that exists in the United States.
Yes, so the Icelandic office in charge of evaluating all the marriage documentation advised us that simply a letter from our state's Vital Statistics office stating that they had done a search of their database and hadn't found anything would be sufficient.
So back to the Office of Vital Statistics we went. At the time we were applying in 2021, our Vital Records database had only records up to 2019. Meaning that there would be a gap of about 16 months. But still, they fulfilled our odd request.
So at this time, we took the letter that the Vital Records office gave us and sent that, along with everything else that we had, to the Icelandic government electronically, just so that they could review everything before we physically mailed them original copies. At this point, we were told that everything was okay so far as long as we found an up-to-date record that would fill that gap.
So after thinking about it for a while, we decided to try to go to our local probate court in our county, since they're the entity that actually issues the marriage certificates and their database would be more current. So they found this to be a pretty strange request, but they were happy to oblige, and they issued us a letter stating that they had done a search all the way back to 2019 where the vital records gap left, and they found no record in their database either. So someone gets to check this off of their weird career box.
And once we included that letter with the rest of our documentation, the Icelandic government told us that we were good to go and we were free to move on to the next step.
So the next form is something called the marriage notification, found on the government's website. This looks a lot like a marriage license in the US.
And we had to find two trustworthy people to sign the form. We chose two of our really close friends. Now, if you take a look at the form, there's a lot of places on there that ask you for an Icelandic ID number. We obviously don't have one of those, and neither do our friends. But you're able to use your date of birth instead, and that's totally fine.
The last section of the form had to be finished by our celebrant in Iceland after the wedding.
That's right, so don't fill that section out. It'll get kicked back. The last thing we had to do was we had to take yet another day off of work, and we had to go see our Secretary of State to get an apostille, which is basically verifying everyone's signature on all the forms that we had to send them. So the last thing we had to do was pack everything up in a DHL envelope and wait about a week and a half for it to get to Iceland.
Going to all these offices and getting all these signatures and forms and sending off this paperwork cost us about $156. So now that all our forms are squared away, let's talk about the actual elopement. So we flew to Iceland a few days prior to the wedding so we could get settled and see Reykjavik for a bit.
Round trip tickets from South Carolina were about $1,800 for 2 of us, which was okay with us since we decided we were going to be in the country for a couple weeks. On the way from the airport, we had to stop at the office to pick up the completed form. Well, that wasn't particularly helpful, now was it? Let me see if I can clear this up. The office I'm referring to is the office of the District Commissioner of Greater Reykjavik, which, despite its name, is not actually located in Reykjavik, but rather about 10 kilometers away in the suburb of Kópavogur. The department that deals with marriages is located on the 3rd floor, and once you're there, they'll check your passport and give you the approved marriage notification form that you'll need to give to your celebrant, as well as all the original copies of the documents you mailed them. It's important to note that it is not downtown. You will need to either take a bus or a rental car to get to the office.
Our accommodations for this part of the trip was in a nice part of Reykjavik, and we wanted to utilize credit card points, and ultimately we spent $0. However, the cash value for those 3 nights was around $910, and so we wanted to make sure to include that in our figure for y'all. We picked up a flower crown made by a local florist, and a local makeup artist came to our apartment and did my hair and makeup, including the flower crown, which is really nice.
So we ended up buying both of our wedding rings on Etsy.
I bought a dress on Amazon and some hiking boots for $85, which I still wear.
I wore a traditional hand-knit sweater that I bought locally.
We decided to bring these little hand-painted cake toppers around the country with us on our journey.
Little guys that went on our adventure with us.
Yeah.
Altogether, we're for clothing and rings and these little guys, we're looking at about $1,050. We found an Asatru celebrant to officiate our wedding. Asatru is kind of like an Icelandic pagan religion. Each area of the country has someone called a godi, which is like a head priest, kind of.
Yeah.
So we contacted the one for the area that we were getting married in.
For his time and resources, including the actual elopement and then helping us out with the paperwork, we paid him around $660.
We found our photographer online as well. His name was Leszek Nowakowski. You can check him out at his website. He was amazing.
Yeah, 10/10 would recommend.
Took some amazing photos. For all his time, we spent about $650 plus a tip.
And in the grand scheme of wedding photographers, it's an absolute deal.
Definitely, and we got some incredible photos out of it.
We rented a car for the day, and I absolutely recommend that you get your international license if you plan on doing any driving abroad.
Some places it's not necessary, but it's really just a good practice to do.
After picking up the car, we drove to our wedding destination and hopped a fence. So for a 24-hour rental, the car was $92.
And it was a nice car.
Yeah. We drove about 2 hours east and hiked 20 minutes to a secluded waterfall. It was around 32 degrees outside.
But the hike really warmed us up. So when we got there, our celebrant took a moment to make the time and the place sacred. When we got started, he recited a short verse from the Havamal in Old Norse and then took a moment and did his best to paraphrase it for us in English.
Next, we exchanged our oaths, which we wrote ourselves.
And we exchanged wedding rings, the ones we bought on Etsy.
After we exchanged rings, our celebrant spoke more ancient Norse and translated that back into Icelandic and translated that to us in English to seal the deal. And then we got to do the kiss. Yay!
And apparently, in Asatru weddings, it's a tradition to drink from a horn. So we got to do that too.
Yeah, we drank mead from a horn. We each got to have a sip, and then the rest was poured down the river, given to the earth.
And then after our ceremony, our amazing photographer worked with us for a couple more hours and took us to a couple amazing locations, and we got some incredible photos out of it.
Oh yeah. After we finished taking photos, we drove 2 hours west back to Reykjavik, where we crashed. I mean, we were exhausted. It was a really long day, but it was amazing. And we were married. This is the total amount we spent on our wedding. Around $5,650.
We chose to include the cost of the flight in that figure for the context of this breakdown, but we had also planned to spend 2 weeks in Iceland, and our wedding was just one feature of the larger trip.
As we said earlier, we also utilized credit card points for our accommodation, which lowered our total cost a fair amount. We thought it would be important to include the actual cost to give an accurate picture of what it can cost for those of you who are thinking about doing something like this. Of course, it's those customizable details like dresses and rings, the photographer, and the celebrant that can really depend on your personal vision and budget. We personally chose to balance budget with experience. What we wore was not as important as being there and capturing this adventure.
So thank you so much for sticking around until the end. We really hope that we were able to teach you something about eloping in Iceland.
Be sure to like and subscribe so you can receive notifications for our next video. We spent over a week driving around the country in a camper van, starting with our day trip to the Golden Circle and snorkeling in an Arctic fissure.
So thanks for getting away with the maze.
Bye.